Well, we continue to get reaction to developments coming out of Mozambique today, with the Constitutional Council in the country declaring the October election a success for Frelimo and Daniel Chapo. We get analysis now from Advocate Sipho Mantula, researcher at the Thabo Mbeki Africa School of Public and International Affairs at Unisa. Advocate, thank you so much for speaking to us, and we really do appreciate your time. I spoke to a journalist just moments ago, Estacio Valoy, in his words, saying what he sees is Mozambique burning, and that these protests he doesn't think will be short-lived. At the beginning of today, we knew that this pronouncement would come. Did you think that we would be seeing these protests? Did you think that this would be the proclamation from the council?
Evening, Naledi, and Jumbo Africa to your viewers. Indeed, Naledi, one will say that there were expectations that the Constitutional Council will definitely validate and confirm Frelimo, looking at the margins of those election results. And secondly, I think what has happened 2 months ago has shown that the signs of burning and looting is even continuing, as you know, that they are in that stage of the V8 mode now, of from Monday to Friday, where there will be protests. But if one looks, there were 2 ways that Podemos used here. They went to the courts, but at the same time, they went to the streets. So they were awaiting the electoral justice to take its course, or what Venancio is saying, he wanted electoral truth, but at the same time, there is electoral lies within this electoral dispute process. So if one looks broadly, you have Mozambique that is going through the tough times, through the Cyclone Chido now, Cabo Delgado, and they've been going through a lot. Those 33 million population members or community members are struggling since 1994, when Frelimo came into power, or between 1981 and 1994, when Frelimo got into power. So you will understand that the challenges that are facing Mozambique are so huge that even the courts were seen not to be independent. There was this issue that those 7 judges, the 7 bench judges, were not independent, and at the same time, they were getting threats. So you'll understand that we are in the situation where you have put these courts under pressure to can adjudicate. At the same time, you have socio-economic challenges, as my colleague was saying earlier, that there are issues of socio-economic challenges that are facing Mozambique, but also electoral irregularities that took place on the 9th of October.
Yeah, and then, of course, there's going to be the question around what this does to a generation of voters that perhaps doesn't have the nostalgia of Frelimo, the party that liberated Mozambique, and how they view some of their own, I suppose, national infrastructure and institutions, such as the Constitutional Council.
No, correctly. That also gives a deficit. It is also raising the lack of trust on their own institutions, and as you said, it is also raising alarming signs about the role and the functioning of the liberation movements in the SADC region. Considering that Frelimo was once the party of Samora Machel, who liberated Mozambique from the Portugal governance. But when you see again, for me, it is that for them, it is to understand that they might need a national dialogue. You might need to go on a national dialogue, even if it has been proposed before by Frelimo. But I think this national dialogue should be a different one of its kind, which will also apply by getting to SADC peer learning to understand that we had elections in SADC of more than 8 countries, including Mozambique, and only 2 of them so far, including Windhoek, which also has a presidential dispute, which I don't think it will go to this level of Mozambique. But also you need electoral reforms to have independent electoral management bodies. And thirdly, I think what we have seen, it is the level of not only violence by the community, but you also see the level of violence by the police, because police have also maimed and killed some of the community members, including the lawyers of Podemos, which has been the political trigger, because political assassinations during electioneering also becomes a trigger of an electoral violence, whether post-elections or during elections. And that's where I see that Mozambique it is heading towards, and there is a need for that, what I call regional national dialogue.
Can we talk about what that regional dialogue around, electoral reform needs to look like? Because, I mean, there's certainly the role that people say, well, SADC should have played a role, for instance, in Zimbabwe's elections. Depending on how you view it, you might feel that not enough was done there. Was this matter in Mozambique handled sufficiently by SADC leaders? And what is that regional electoral conversation that needs to happen? And are we having these conversations at a surface level and simply not seeing change for people?
Absolutely, Naledi. But Naledi, remember that when you talk of elections, electorates are the key actors, are the key role players. So even if when you want to amend electoral laws or electoral processes, you need to always consult. Secondly, when you are talking of the big question that you are raising in terms of SADC's effectiveness, the role of SADC, remember there was an extraordinary summit in Zimbabwe. They kind of shelved this issue of Mozambique and left it for Philip Nyusi as the outgoing president to say, Philip Nyusi, deal with the question of Mozambique. When actually SADC had a mission that pulled out in July during the situation in the north. And you have Rwandese. We have the EU pumping money on the peacekeeping mission of Mozambique because of the natural resources that are there. So I think it's the issue of where is our priorities in the SADC region and why there is this issue of cover-up by SADC heads of states, because you will understand here it is the role of President Mnangagwa as the chair, it's the role of Samia Sulu as the chair of the Troika, it's the role of South Africa as the immediate neighbor also to be interested, as we have done, to say, can we push for constructive engagement and dialogue, Naledi, that will include the civil society, that will include the observers that were involved in these elections, because you will understand there were what we'll call a different analysis that came from the EU observer mission, the SADC, and the AU. So you will understand that observers also had their own views about these elections. The role of media also have their views about what they've seen. And that's when I feel that when you talk of the role of SADC, I always say that, but the citizens of SADC have to hold SADC leaders accountable, because some of these leaders of SADC are the ones who are pushing us into this level of political violence and at the same time political anarchy that is also being leveled, perpetuated by the state.
Strong words that you use there, political anarchy. I want to do this. Let's just look at how long the 9th of October was here, Advocate Mantula, when this election took place. This is not a short period of time between then and now, when the Constitutional Council now makes the pronouncement. In the meantime, though, you've had these sporadic protests that, I suppose one would think that there was an expectation that there'd be protester fatigue up until now, when we really didn't necessarily see that, did we? We saw protesters that took a breath and then still went out to the streets to continue protesting this, as they did today with the pronouncement. The reason why I raise that is when you hear from Estacio say, well, these protests could go on for months, what does that do to the political stability of a country and certainly its neighbors over the long run?
Naledi, remember, I will recall Memire Makeba when you say a luta continua Mozambique, but in this notion in the 21st century, a luta continua in Mozambique is to look at it at the faces that we have raised. The last one of saying, what impact will it raise in the SADC region? It has already affected South Africa. It has already affected Eswatini. It has already affected Zimbabwe in terms of economic trade. And secondly, the social cohesion, the nation building, the issue of building this regional cohesion in the SADC region. And thirdly, as you have said, and I've mentioned it, it has created the international community to be focusing on exploiting the natural resources and not focusing on the national issues, which include the issue of political governance and political transfer of power. Because elections is the transfer of political power, which also include economic responsibility, respect of the rule of law. But in this case, we are seeing a long night that will be going into in terms of Mozambique coming out of its electoral dispute resolution or electoral violence. And as you have said, the question becomes that this violence, Mozambique has a history. Remember that they've went on a civil war. So the armed conflict that they've went through, it always rings into mind that our liberators have become our oppressors. Our liberators have become the corruptees. They are now corrupt. And these are the questions that have been seen in Mozambique during the era of Nyusi, Gubeza. All the leaders who have ruled Mozambique post-Samora Machel have been questioned. Even Daniel Chapo, as a newly elected president now, there are people who have raised questions around his character, credibility. But I think, Naledi, it is important for the SADC region, for the people of Mozambique to understand that it is important to engage on a peaceful resolution, to engage on a national dialogue. And also, it is important for the state not to use this maximum force and killing of innocent people, because that's where you are finding ourselves that 110 people so far, in terms of the stats that we have been killed. So you have many loss of lives, and then you have economy that is not growing, and you have the challenges of the cyclone, by the way. And remember, between now and January, you are still going to have many cyclones in that region.
You know, I need to make this point, and I think we'll start getting towards recommendations, but if you'll allow me to just reflect on this with you, Advocate Mantula. Other liberation movements, are they watching? And what do they take from this? Or do you get the sense that they simply aren't listening? You know, I immediately think of a country like Uganda, for instance, and even if we did the mathematics, what's it, Frelimo taking over Mozambique back in 1975, I think it was. Bobby Wine, for instance, in Uganda, making the point that if you are 35 years old in Uganda, you only know one president, and that is Yoweri Museveni. When there is this uprising, does it matter to liberation movements that are still confident that they can hold on to power?
Now, lady, it do matters. As they say that no matter the weather, it matters for the national liberation movements. And when I say so, they do share notes. And you'll recall also that when the national liberation movements, when they were looking at South Africa in May, they saw that, are we going for a coalition government or this government of national unity? And that's why I was running away from talking to you about, is Mozambique going to the solution of GNU?
Yeah.
Or will they accept? Because even our GNU, it is built on a false basis, or what can say, a false notion of that this is the GNU that people wanted, but ultimately it was just electorates who didn't want to vote and who pushed people to go and vote. But national liberation movements are becoming now irrelevant when they are not giving freedom and servicing their own communities.
Okay.
When they are not raising development.
I need to jump in.
Irrelevant.
Yeah, and I think apologies. Apologies, Advocate. I'm running out of time, and I need to squeeze this one in. But you can finish that thought in this one as well.
Yeah.
You mentioned the GNU. Yeah, you mentioned the GNU. So what is the right political solution? Apologies, I need to squeeze that one in.
Yeah. No, for me it is that you can't have a GNU where you didn't have almost 45, 50, or there was no outright winner. Here you have Frelimo even 65% now. Here you have Podemos 24%. But when I say you have to compromise for the government of national unity, it is to build Mozambique. It will not be just government of national unity for just power sharing and position allocation and squandering of the natural resources. Here, I don't think our GNU can be the template. Our GNU was just a miscarriage of electoral justice. So I don't think we should push it there. I think it's for the Mozambicans to can decide what part of governance they will want to have, because if they don't want Frelimo, then they have to accept the court judgment or go for the national dialogue.
Yeah, a national dialogue that we know is expected here in South Africa as well. Advocate Sipho Mantula, we really do appreciate your analysis on those developments coming out of Mozambique today. The Constitutional Council proclaiming or giving that proclamation that Frelimo and Daniel Chapo are the successful winners of that October election in Mozambique. Advocate Sipho Mantula is a researcher at the Thabo Mbeki African School of Public and International Affairs. You're still watching Newsfeed PM, the late edition with myself, Naledi Mulo. We'll take a short break. We're back in a moment.